Dezo kaju lama nam jupa zeno nam tra jinjil chantung je kor sampa jinsen gana chakshen mepa sende data jupe gongchen
Nga degu jebe lama la junde suvan debe gomje la jume moge jeva sinje ingme gomje nguje zumba je gomshir dobe mogo soma ma jue de kan jobe gomje la gomza lodon derwa sinje lo juge sumwa Jiyon maye jiyon charwa la manga roba jarwe gomje Gonde yerme doba zinje la jewa gonde yonda lama Rame chuje bala longju jen sadon lamje yonde rabdo Goje jonge gombo nyu do
剛才報道嘅係喺香港支聯會副主席。
Chatu marane number solan samre shiva don ji ta kabs ba nga so te ane zinda sina do ne chutu peche de ngombol ro ge ya anze pi ben tenju ta umar so tok non te ji ben za wa shirab je le te cha de yore ta ji no za wa shirab le de ne this mombo no yoro yimba ina yon dada nga suge de kabs babene de petino tino no yon shuloga kahiezo ne sol tone ne de shuna sam des ne nga su tab de o chi ne des ne yabo chando sare sam sam jero jino nga su namju de sawa shirab lewe de bombo shewe ji yore yon di chapzon char suma ne des yon godo che ragya no je namju nga su surju shecho je yoro 진납자 진보리 다대네 희월에 네 가서 야보 희월에 해서지 여러 안에 대용 타제도 용 공연반로 요뭐 나 디 소네 조게 코로네 자와 시라고 코로 조게 겨자자는 또 땡자데 조 가래 임바데 네 소소 데스 네 라바서 롱어 샤르송아나 네 데스 가서 진용 단네 용 데스 개변전은 뭐도 고도 됐어. 여보 차트비 레와 차요. 대인용 아주 대간서 실로고 가시에서 서른 동 안에 대学 제거로. 대중도 따자윙 가서 내가 지슈 가래서는 자와시라는 용코로 지도 몸보지리에 이지게다 자와로데 네 저 저자들은 뭐도 당우대게 땡자 가래. 따대병 가서 됐어. 수소네 롱어 샤르트바이나 카유로 요구됐어. 펜토 야고 차트고 예상고 남제 텐데상고 저노데 용 몸보지레데 자위게 저자 제네 파테네 테네 티 연라데 딱 몸보지 따롭게 남자 몸보지 다 숨거 여러 이잔로 연락에 따롭 남자 몸보지 숨바 인노 이지게 따롭게 좀진로데 가래에 맞대 가서 원지지 마타바이나 연락에 따롭데 몸보지네 디게 람칼라네 로 디 몸보지 가서 남지 제다가자 토바 삼바로 제다바이나 요 캐페 가시지 특고요 봐 수수고도 가시지 특고요 봐 대대도 내봐 거요 말했시.
So I'd first like to begin by wishing everyone good morning. And so we could say this is a class, we can call it a teaching, but at any rate, what we are talking about is one of the 6 texts on logic by Nagarjuna. And this is the root verses, the root stanzas of the middle way. Now, in general, actually, the root stanzas is a long text with many different chapters. But I thought that it would be easier for us to understand it if I just selected a few stanzas and taught those few stanzas. So usually there's a lot of the root stanzas of the middle way are very long, And what we usually like to do is what we usually say is that it's most beneficial if you study the entire text, that you get a better understanding. It's a very important text, and therefore that you get more blessings from understanding it. And so this is what we normally say. And it's the tradition of saying this. However, that's not necessarily the case that you will necessarily get a better understanding. And the reason is that there's just so much material there. So maybe actually, if you just select a few verses out of the root stanzas of the middle way that teach the main topic of the text, then you get a basic idea of what the text is saying. And I think that actually might be more helpful and more beneficial for you. So you get just a good idea of the basic meaning of the text. And so for that reason, I have selected a few stanzas to discuss this weekend. Now, the main point of the root stanzas, the middle way, is that even though there is a lot of text and the root verses are there, the root text is very long, but what is the main topic? If we have an idea of what the main topic of the root stanzas of the middle way are, then it will be more practical. We'll be able to gain a practical understanding that we can actually apply. And so even though it's often said that it's best to go through the entire text from beginning to end, but generally there's the basic meaning of the text, and then there are all the secondary arguments, all of the different proofs of different positions and so forth. And so even though it's said that that is generally better to do, it's not necessarily going to be the best way to gain an understanding. And so for that reason, I think if we think about it, what is the best way to understand it? If we want to go through and really listen to, hear, and contemplate all the teachings in this text, then of course we'd go through from beginning to end. But it's not certain how much benefit we'd actually gain from that.
那首先呢，在这里先跟大家呢说，早安。那今天呢，我们可以说是在上课或者是在教学。那但是不管是怎么样呢，今天呢讲到的是关于逻辑当中的6部论点当中，Nagarjuna 龙树菩萨他所写的中观根本论。那中观根本论它非常的长，有很多的当中有很多品。那今天呢，我们是选当中的某几个句子呢来讲解。那一般根据传统上面来说，我们说要学习整本的论点，从头学到尾。那么呢，我们可以得到最多的加持，也是最多的利益。而这本呢，也是非常重要的这样的论点。那但是实际上来说，可能也不一定是这样。原因呢是因为当中的内容太多了，所以也许我们选当中的重点，然后让大家明白基本的有基本的了解，然后这样也许对你更有帮助。所以呢，选了当中的某几个句子来说，那所以也就是说，虽然论点很长，但是如果我们有对基本的义理有了解呢，就能够应用了。那一般的来说，我们会说这些论点呢，它有当中基本的义理，还有次要的支持的义理等等。那所以虽然说我们说从头讲到尾，这样是好的，我们也可以这样做，但是到底是不是这样对你有帮助呢？这还不确定的。所以今天我们只是讲当中的某几个句子。
那这种偏把说个呀，研究中被告诉这种那个突然说弄了这么个样吧，这讲的 tenju de su no la mo je ta dura ane jacha chukyu denchu se ane dura dige ta kaseta nitsu no dizina shuna mendo yon da sheyong de desen de dige ko zo she res mixe ge ching ta di no mo che de jacha chukyu denju di dura dige ane lora dige ka so tadrop ke nam ya de mo che ngoma su jin ro de she ro ta dige dura vina ta on de ta kasete desen menrap chepa yoro yon kase chulo ge desen no yana ene durab tati ke no la chulo ge pena sheyong ge desen si ka ge chile we pa te ja ja chu den jo ti no zo koso ke ne ten ze ndo daga no ye ne chenre koso ge desen na durab ge chepa chen yo ti ke shi chi tong education ke te la war ro te ti den ta zo ten ge yoro wa te jing dang a so da gompo lurab ke ne konde durab de ne do ta de ne loye ne kase pipi ke ne loye ke tu de la te ye chor mrab mo bo je yo yo namba kashi ke da de lo ni don nim ja gong la yo pep da ba ten je ke ye chor je yo yo kashi ke lo ni don tik ja ke ne gong la pep da ba je song ge yo yo kashi ke da gompo lurab durab dong bo no pepa songo yore, jitong mo cha tati shimjao me ane durab nipi ki ji dewa chi pepa ane songo yore. Te kong chepa ya ma ko durab ngoma pep songo na yaan roya, jitong tsima pep songo na yaan roya, jitong yung tsima pep na pa ina dong roya, ngoma pepa ina ane dong roya, te chepa kaya ya ma. Kongji ko durab ko chepa ko ya ma, ko jitong ane shi tsi ke si kasen tome chechang tene desi nga so kaso ta pento zene mendo ngo kayu lau yo ke ngone teke ta je reu sompo za ti tene yago ma ta durab ke nga se ko cheba yo ma wa yinba ina ta da kong ke zombi be nga so te ama rekso choke non la zo da zawa shirab te cha de yo wa ta zawa shirab non la zo ten za te ne ta durab di kabla gombolo pipe di kabla so ne moja ta tadrup ke nam ya se songa yores ta ti unde jidong aso suju he so je yo tadrup se ya ta su chulo menra ba ne chungta menra ba shi mo bo yo ro yena da su ne chulo no chungta de so la ne shi je ta suju he so no yi je za chen bo shi je yin da de la has mi zo nam ju he so je yo Teta mai bang gombol ro ke da ne chulo to da tadrup nam ya song da ba te zo da ri kwa to ka se ta jun sen to ne ri kwa ne des ra kwa zang mai ba ne ngone to ne ke je xin yong to ne ba da jun sen ne chin thong bu go ne zo ne ten pa ge bo je rin do ten yong ten pa ba ten a so nam ju si che so je yo tan gombol ro o ma ga ta drop de pe me si za chen bo ri si yanda ga ta nga su no bi chum da de sen zam do je ta ga no ye rong ja ta ga no ye de do de se ra na wa de so re ne shi ra ta drop la ha jong ge de shi ra de ka sa ta de ga zang ke ne ya bo de wa zang yo ma de zang ma chi ba yo chi ro ge da jong pen do je on so do cham jo de ne da 네 총재바 다가 노지 그 속에 따라데 네 양보 현대지 말이서 근데 숨게지 차요 뭐 는 고불러고 조네 따라게 남자데 대다 템지 리바도 짐세 네 신도 차비건 댐 팝네 디랑 컨트롤 마도 베나 고불러고 의미다와 스타트업시 히브자 침보리 네 딜하스 요 뭐라 현다게 따라데 소네 게 하종데 가세 가르쳐 볼게 말이 후수 따라데 근데 네 시라 네 가세 멤버로 그래서 근데 숨게지 춘 차요 뭐 가요 라우트 지금 오늘 전에 그 심적 바이나 라다다 가서다 개발로 인수 유라네 데 김세도 리피게 람네 근데 딱 건로 터바나 가요 라요 소소라 개 벤토 진짜 뭐다게 신용 대세인데 네 레좀 탑투고로 대자마시 지소노로 빼면서 개네 가요 라요라 벤토 데 신용 그때 시템 통보야 랩톱이로 대자마 또바다 지동게 대 점세동 제 되네데 리와 용다 그 람란로 마타바이나 제 야보가 시즈리 헤다바이나 수수라 중데 보통으로 시라 네 탑타고야말 다가노지 수수게 지초동 고려대 시라제 더와제 네 여진로 투고야 말이스
So now, Noble Nagarjuna was a great scholar who wrote this text in sometime in the early in the first millennium. Now, most of the Buddhist philosophical texts that we study these days were written in the 6th or 7th century, so sometime around 600 or 700 AD, 6th or 7th, 8th century. And so most of the philosophical texts that we study and look at reflect the educational levels, the thought of that time. So it's about 60 or 70% of the different texts that we study. So they basically present the philosophy as it was explained at that time. Now, of course, there are many different types of philosophy. There are many different areas. There are different schools of philosophy, different religions. But generally what we study is mostly in the 6th or 7th century. And the reason why it's important to know this is that it's kind of like science. Like when you're studying science, if you understand what era some scientist was teaching in, then you can understand the basic environment and the basic level of teachings and education that they would have had at that time. So similarly with the Buddhist texts, if you understand the dates and the times, you get an idea of the environment that teacher was teaching in. So Nagarjuna was a master, and if we think about his dates, there are actually many different positions on when Nagarjuna was alive. So there are some who say that he lived 2,200 years ago. Some who say that he lived 2,100 years ago. These are in the 1st century. These days, most scholars who've done research on this say that he lived in the 2nd century. But there's not necessarily certain that he was in that century. It's not exactly known. But in any case, actually, it's not necessarily terribly important whether we know whether he was earlier or whether he was later. It's not like if he appeared earlier, then he would have been worse and later would have been better, or that he would have been later would have been worse and earlier would have been better. That's not the way that it is. Still, when we understand the era that he was teaching in, then it helps us give an idea of the society that he was in and the environment that he was teaching in. And so there's some sort of a benefit for understanding that. Other than that, the exact century is not necessarily so important. Now, when we look at the texts of Nagarjuna, in particular among his 6 great texts on logic, the root stanzas on the middle way, primarily what these are teaching is Buddhist philosophy. Now, and he's teaching a traditional explanation of Buddhist philosophy. Of course, in Buddhist philosophy, there are many different positions, there are many different schools, many different ideas. So when we look at this, it's not like we should think to ourselves, and some people do think this, they think, okay, well, this text is a really important text. This is the greatest text, and it's really important to know it. It's got a lot of blessings. It's a great text. So we should learn it for that reason. But that's not actually necessarily the way it was. When Nagarjuna himself was teaching the philosophy, he used logic and reasoning. He used logic and reasons. And he didn't do this on just a course level. He actually went in a very, very subtle level to think about the level of education, the logic and the reasons and so forth. And he went to a very deep level on this. So when we look at Nagarjuna and we think about Nagarjuna's text, some people might say, well, Nagarjuna taught the middle way, and so therefore he is really important. This is a really important text. You have to study the middle way. You can't really, the other schools like the mind only or the sutra school or the exposition school, they're not so good. They're not so great. They're not like the middle way that Nagarjuna taught. And then there are the non-Buddhist philosophies of that time. There's the Charvaka school. There are the various schools of the Ishvara or the Hindu schools. There's the Sankhya school. And there are all sorts of different schools. You think, oh, they're not so important. But when Nagarjuna was teaching, he wasn't thinking like that. Nagarjuna didn't, when he was writing his philosophy, in the 6 texts on logic, and in particular this, he used reason and logic. It's not like Nagarjuna thought to himself, oh, the middle way is best, and therefore nothing else is worth looking at. This is the best. Instead, he thought, what are the reasons? What is the logic behind it? He didn't say the other philosophical schools, the other ideas are not important, they're worse. Instead, he actually looked at it and he thought, what is it about? So he used logic and reasoning to make his positions and to go forward. And because he was able to do this, it was of great practical benefit to himself, and it also brought great benefit to the society and people around him. So this is one of the this is an important thing about him because he was teaching. It helped his society. It helped increase people's level of understanding and education. And so for that reason, if we do not use logic and reasoning and give good reasons for for our answers, then it's not going to be very beneficial for our own understanding, nor will it be able to bring much benefit to our society or to the environment around us.
那我们今天学习的中观根本论撰写的是圣龙树菩萨。那么据说呢这一部他撰写的时间呢大概是公元1世纪左右，1世纪初所写的。我们大部分的佛教的哲学的这些论点呢，他所撰写的时间是公元6到7世纪的时间。那他们所写的这些哲学的内容呢，它是包含了他们当时的学术上的一些观点，还有哲学等等。那这样的一些论点有很多的分类，有不同的宗义，有很多的流派，那当然也包括其他的宗教等等。那但是我们为什么要了知他所处于的时代呢？那因为这里有一点的利益，也就是我们可以知道当时的社会还有当时的背景。那就这一点呢，其实是跟科学很类似的。那在科学当中，科学家会讲一些科学的观点。那我们如果了解科学家所处于的时代，还有当时的社会背景、环境等等，那么呢，我们可以更深入的了解到他的所说的这个观点等等。那总之呢，龙树菩萨，他是什么时代的人呢？有的说是大概2200年前，有的说是2100年前。那现在大部分的人呢，的学者呢说他是公元2世纪的人，但这一点呢也是不确定的。那总之呢，时间到底确实是什么时间呢，并不是那么的重要，但是了解当时大概的后面的社会背景呢，这一点呢是对我们是有利益的。那总之呢，在我们说的关于逻辑的6部论点当中特别是中观的 根本论啊当中所讲到的就是佛教的哲学。佛教的哲学有很多的宗派啊，有很多的宗义，有很多不同的分类等等。那有的时候呢，我们会觉得说，某一部的论点它是利益特别大的，它的加持非常大。那所以呢，我们必须要去学习，就好像是我们说中观根本论哦，是龙树菩萨说的非常的重要，一定要去学习。那但是实际上呢，龙树菩萨他写的时候呢，他并不是真的这么想的。那首先，在这部《中观根本论》当中呢，他讲到的是逻辑，运用逻辑，还有寻找原因哦。所以在当中呢，有讲到粗大层面，还有微细层面的逻辑推理等等。那而且呢，他讲的非常的深入，他的层面非常的深入。那所以，有的时候我们会觉得说，中观是最重要的，我们必须要学习。然后可能会觉得说，唯识还有有部、精良部等等，这些可能并不是这么的殊胜，并不是这么的重要。那还有就是其他的非佛教的宗派等等这些，那它也是并不那么重要的。那我们一般是会这样的去想，那但是实际上在龙树菩萨他写的中观根本论的时候，他并不是用这样的一种思维而写的，而是呢他真正的运用逻辑推理，他去思考背后的原因所以是因为这样，通过逻辑推理，他才写下这部的论点，也因为他运用的是真正的运用逻辑推理去观察，去得到他的结论而写下的这部论点。那最后呢，他能够利益到他自己，而且呢，对他身边的人还有社会呢，以后的社会都带来了很大的利益。那对哲学、对学术等等都有很大的利益。所以也因此呢，也就是我们的重点就是要真的运用逻辑跟逻辑推理。那只有这样呢，我们才能够真正的利己利他。
특히 다 제노도 당하서 드랍 지서직 바 랩차로 지금 당하서 네 세대직 제발 남미 드랍을 또 됐다 하종 그때 신용 때문에 네 신탐보 랩차 차도 여러 와 근데 당하서 남주 네 surgical knowledge de chikiasoche yo wo tate da ne komise ke jinse to koto hira ne jinse ro maraba ina yo de surgical ke chiasoche shiwe ya bo re stene chebar phabar stene che chiasoche yo tate za maye ba chi ngaso da chulo de che no ina ra ta no ji pe na chulo maye pe de se kanda che ina no kayu lao yo ngaso mo so so la ne 무체노 데스네 고연보 동네 야보스 차야라네 오늘 돈에게 조는 간로데네 신용 대체노 랩토고 여러 신용 대체도 조 신용 지동 라고 잡마이 봐 그래서 신용 안에 그래서 사보 네로 사보 그때네 고도 야보라 터반 카유 라유 수수 무체다 데스 고연보 네 데스 로보 차트 그래 대자마 시베 수수가 너무 더 수수가 제초 수수가 자가 가요 라요고네 되게네 야보스네 준비 야보 탑토가 맞다베 당아서 디 수주게 노이라오지 에네 딘리게 따주제 키다바나 수수용 데스 뭐지 네 가져다 데스 백거 도보 푸스 도보 다노이 너무 더 제초 정말 된다 차들 대 가요 라요 차요 tenda yesunde tada ngaso tada Nagarjuna ane ta gombol drop tawe na one to ne ko rigpi ke lamne de rikwa chamo junse pe sabu ke lamne ko tadrop ke namya songke jiri da madobe o ta susu tadrop de chebar phawpa che yenda te shabda na so nobi ke tadrop pe mawa yenda no che ne noba mai be yenda ke tadrop mawa te su ke tadrop de yabo mari te su tukbor tene sungme da chen one thone de khase ta jo shenyong ke koto jo ke ne khase ta ko tie kase die campaigns and then revision book lam ten ro thugo yaro tera yido ngaso choma ta dira ni salje no lecture this godo so ke ne this compare ton ya te cheba na khayu la yu te nire ke mse na de pen thugo yaro ro ma ta be ta so ju no yin ro de sana one ni ma re ke ne ka this kaza ta ko yongpol pe kali khabo chadaro te ngasu te da susu ke nyamnyo den ne samdo dona ha go thugundo ro te jingde da khayu lagyu ke mone shinyo de se ten ne susu tes ti no lo pa ne samdo don tes ti no lo la khadina es shimjog chi thaba na khayu lagyu phen thugre mone to ne ro ma ta ba ngasu namji ta je yao do se ya de ne so ju ke de chen no yi chen ne ta je selo ne le ge yo bi tin di ke ta drop ke lam khan ro da ban su des pus to bo to ne ko yong bo me ba su zon ro da yo selo ke de no yo ta drop de ko to bo pus to bo de so thu ge yo ma ro ka si su sam no de tong ge yo ba na so thu ge yo ma tin de khayu la yu la da maso susu ke de des goto chamo ne ten la des ne samno toya don ti de lampar ju ya pemsi naga chego cha de da dik durable kasi jinyo de ne ngaso de shenyo goto de hajong chi tombo cha charo muni durable do de maso de chide jin ha go tugor de susu su gong ge ne mu lam nan ra malam ra ne cheba yom susu ge ne chide jeban ha go tugor yaris 근데 동원에 돈에 그때 따드마와이나 다가노게 따드마와 많이 게네다 신용게 대신 놀라이나 그래서 가요 라요네 네 락다르데 치터바나 수소라 네 딱 캠페인즈네 민도 네 준비 됐어 다 리뷰좀 버티된 덕트고 맞아 그 인다 데스칼 하고 차이です
So nowadays, we're in the 21st century. And in this 21st century, as you all know, we have a very high level of education and knowledge in general, especially in compared to earlier areas and earlier times. And I think this is something that we can see, we can understand from our experience. When we think about traditional when we think about traditional explanations, though, often we think that there, is not so much reasoning, not so much logic or understanding to them. We think that they're traditional explanations, and so therefore we just need to follow them because they're traditional. Therefore, we need to do what they say. But if we just do that, then whether it's a traditional Buddhist philosophy or religious philosophy, or whether it's some other sort of philosophy, then actually it's not as practical benefit. Instead, we shouldn't be like that. Instead, we should see what we understand and try to find something that's going to be of practical benefit, to use our logic and understanding and reasons. And if we do this, then it'll be possible for us to find a way to have kind of a vaster or broader feeling in this life, a more expansive feeling, a better relationship to this lifetime. And this is something that comes from within. It's not something that's imposed from outside. And this means that we can't just understand things on sort of a general way. We actually have to have a pretty fine and deep understanding of things. And if we have that deep understanding of things, then we'll find that naturally things just become more expansive for us. And then if we have that more expansive understanding, it'll be beneficial for our families, for our society, for our country. We can see this practically. We can understand how this happens. Now, when it comes to traditional teachings, we might think that it's not like that. We should just follow the traditional teachings because they're good. That's how they are. And we should just do them. And if we do that, then actually it's not going to be as beneficial for ourselves. It's not going to be as so when we need to also examine the traditional teachings and use the reasoning and get and look at them in this way. And if we do, so then it'll also bring great benefit or a good result for ourselves, for our families, and our society. So like with Nagarjuna, for example, Nagarjuna really went through a very fine and subtle level of reasoning. And because of that, he was able to teach something that was really beneficial. So if he didn't just say, this is my view, this is the most important, it's the best view. He didn't say, this is the Buddhist view. He didn't say that my view is better than other Buddhist philosophies, it's better than other non-Buddhist philosophies. He didn't say that. Instead, he used his knowledge and his understanding. And because of that, it was really beneficial. There was a really good result that came out of following that path. And so in the same way, now in the 21st century, we should do the same thing. And if we do, then it'll bring benefit for ourselves. And so when we have that deeper understanding, then in every day, it'll make us have a kind of a more expansive lifestyle. It'll be something expansive understanding. This will be beneficial for us. And it is, again, it's not something that anyone imposes from outside. It's something that you think for yourself. And so, so if you think about the reasons and think about it carefully and you do your own consideration, then it's going to be of practical benefit. If you just say, oh, this is good, though, because this is traditional, and you don't really think about it, then what's going to happen is that your view becomes narrow. And when your view becomes narrow, it's not like anyone else has made your view narrow. You have done it yourself. You have made your own view yourself. And if it becomes narrow like that, then it's going to be, will not work as well for you. And so you can see this. You can actually look at your own experience and see this. So what's important is that we need to use our logic and understanding so we can come to a more subtle understanding and make progress. And this will definitely have more benefit. This is actually a really important point about the teachings. So in these days, we have in general a very high level of education, but we need to understand that when we're talking about philosophy or we're talking about philosophers or different levels of education, if we have a good understanding of them, then they can bring us a good benefit. We could say that they bring us a benefit or bring us a good result. If we don't have that deep understanding, though, then it'll be hard to get any benefit from them.
那我们现在处于的是21世纪。那现在这个时代，我们的教育还有知识呢是非常的高的，特别是跟过去相比。那这一点呢，我想大家从个人的经验上面都可以了知的。那另外呢，就是我们经常会讲到传统的教学等等，然后呢，我们都会遵从传统的教学。那原因呢，就是因为它是很殊胜的，很好的。那但是如果这样做的话，没有经过任何的推理分析就跟随了。那么我们如果跟随的不管是佛教的哲学、非佛教的哲学等等，那不跟分析的就去追随，那我们很难得到很大的利益的。那所以只有我们真正的去思维、去推理、深入的了解，那么呢才能够把我们的认知呢扩展。那这样才能够真正让这一生我们说与此生的关系呢会变好得到利益等等。 那总之是，当我们能够深入的思维不只是在触达的层面，而是在微细的层面都能够思考了解，那么自然呢，我们得到的利益它就会慢慢的扩大，然后呢，能够利益到自己、家人还有国家等等。那所以我们平常经常会觉得要遵从呢传统的说法，那这个时候其实只是认为因为传统的就是好的，那但是如果这样去分析就追随的话呢，并不能够真正的利益自他，所以龙树菩萨他在写论点的时候，他是通过深入的推理，而得出的结果，最后呢是利益到自他，他并不是呢说我自己的见地是最好的，或者是说我的见地比其他的佛教的其他佛教的哲学更好，或者是比非佛教的哲学更好，而是他是真正通过逻辑的推理而得到的这个道。那到最后呢，他是给自他呢有很大的利益。那所以同样的来说，我们在这个21世纪当中也是要像龙树菩萨一般的运用逻辑推理，那这样的让我们的见解变得深入广大，而这样的一个我们说这样的一种需求，或者是它并不是从外面来的，不是人家要求你这样做，而是我们自己需要去做的，这样才能够真正的得到利益。那否则，如果我们只是我们去听随遵从一个说法，只是因为它是传统的说法，没有分析没有去推理就接受了，那这样的话，我们的见地会变得狭窄，而让我们见地变得狭窄的不是别人，而是我们自己啊。我们自己让我们的自己见地变得狭窄了，那这样我们很难真正有很大的利益的。那总之呢，就是我们要让我们的认知、我们的了解是要变得非常的深入、非常的细微，在细微的层面都能够真正的了知，那这样才能够真正带来利益，而这个利益呢，也就是这一部的文本当中所讲到的。那所以总之呢，就是要这样的去深入的了解教育哲学，那这样才能够让利益真正的自利利他，否则呢很难真正有大利益的。
好，看着不是的 unmute 起那呢？
但这东啊是他这个对他们用毛波节的，数据给的路上的毛波节有了，毛波节过，他对他你自己弄办不是个呢，对出的还叫个独家小节人多，那咱不能可能了的，可是那他有的操，他那要不那节目都你那操毛波节人多，他那他的。那我们了，这个的办不是个，这么些小节里的人，那应该是有了。空对，讲呢？
个个都làm，个个都。
哎呀，对，那个可说写作这个，搞这个南京啊，那这写作的毛家，说个什么动作，的说六什么动作了，他要不是从嘛那吃了呢出来我也都什么去动，那可是他你得再不弄以前呢。得记得要不从不从嘛吃了来我就什么去动了了。这等着这用特别的，不干了好不晓得了。还有老有个，那叔叔能够做过样的了，叔叔的是，那 고도 안에 람나 쉬나 면도다 수수 안에 원내 전에 신용 대세 대스노 사보지 수수게네 람칼란로 터바나 카유 라유 수수 니마르리게네 생감도 류감게네 거의 영보 네 카유 라유 편도 첨보스 뚜트고요 딜레테네 수수 다다 공시바 노기리 너무 동 테네 수수게 제초 수수게 자가 파뚜트고요 마토피 네 슬로 지구 네 수지 삼노동 디니초 용여바 네 수소라 다가죠 제 능감데 생감게 다조지비 네 대진로 슬로 초용게 삼노 중중 동다바나 가디나 용야 요마로 근데 제다바나 가디나 수소 강아동네 지토게 요마로 다다가서 오늘 전에 몸미게 시선을 제나 다디 들어라가서 뭐지야데 같이 담지 전반 의미 들어 해설노 있지만 담지 전반 노인로 창로다 가서 우차 레리된 잠블랭 크로게네 내추 소망 가서 배나 고도 고와도 통화 지토근노 잠블랭 크로 하종 그배 충청 차사로 다디 들어 데 간르젠 된르젠 가서 고도 지토게 열서는 저 신용게네 된세데스 지통보 랩톱아도 네 신용 대센단의 오늘로네게 람카 디단는 가서 네 다다 점제도 르비케네 펜톨된 정토고요 디카율라고 시고마 또be 뭐보제 마서 다디게 드람들다 두가시면도 된데 삼노동 칠로네 초네 레옹제 지구 삼노동데 수수수수 푸스 도보도 니마르리게네 lunkamsem간 깔리 수수수수소로요다 마토베 칠로게 데 저갑 동제 지초 동제 마신다게 데 조고요마로 데 가시 된데게 소야게 제 차리인로 땡바이나 조 투에 요마로 당아서 남지 시에서제 요서준 칠로네 다 파르지 다 트람시 데다게 네 소마 트람시 베야고 마차 총마 코소소소시 따와지 히에요 된데 제로다바나 수수수수 문에 가져다 대 고용범에 와도 네 푸스 도보도 니마르리게 네 미시게 대지 수수수수 잠이 동으로 디게 람카마 성부지 하종 가르치 무샤요 레스
So, in this present day, we often have actually kind of a traditional way of thinking about things. Like now we're in the 21st century, and we think to ourselves, well, this 21st century is actually a really pretty bad time. There's conflict all over the world. There are illnesses and epidemics. It's just not as good as it used to be. And this is it's just a bad age, a bad era. And so this is a lot of people who think of this way and think about it this way. And when we think about it in one way, that if we have this kind of a traditional view of all of this, the way we're thinking about it is actually a traditional kind of view, and we think that actually everything is coming and is made from outside. It's as if there were a creator God who made the world, who makes all of our happiness and well-being for us. And so if we think that there's something outside of us that's going to create happiness and create a good society and good people, it's really difficult for that actually to happen. So practically, and on a practical level, what happens is that just makes ourselves more confined and difficult to understand. So if we actually have a good understanding, and if we have a good level of education, if we can get to a kind of profound level of this, and we go down this path, then both are physically and mentally, we will be more relaxed. We will have a more spacious, and it'll be beneficial for us. So it's like like I said before, if we think that everything comes from outside, and then it's going to make things hard for us in our family, in our lives, in our society, and so forth. So we shouldn't think that everything is only made from the outside, that it's all exterior conditions that are imposed of us. Instead, we should remember that our own well-being and comfort of body and mind come from ourselves. It's not made from outside. No one's doing it to us. If we think that that's what's happened, that's how it works, then we're just going to make things difficult for ourselves. And so in that way, we're actually thinking about things in a very traditional sort of way. It's like there's some sort of omniscient creator who's making everything for us. But actually, when you think about how the world is, we can see how it's not like that. We can see this in every single breath that we take. Every breath that we take is actually a reflection of how the world as a whole works. We can learn about how the world works just by thinking about our breaths. And so these days, the entire world has become really small. And the way that the world has become small is because of our increase in education and understanding. And so if we go down that path and think about the reasons and the logic, then we can actually see the benefit that it'll bring for that it actually brings to us. If we just think to ourselves, this is a bad time, these are hard times, this is a difficult time, and think it's made from outside, then we are just making it narrow and confined for ourselves. There's no one who's doing that but ourselves. And so we just need to have a better, we need to understand that the situation in the external world is not the cause. It's not what's making it happen. There's no one who's doing it. Instead, it's the way we are thinking about it ourselves. So traditionally, we would think that a time like this is a really unfortunate time, that it's a bad era. But that's not how it is. It's actually our own way of thinking. And if we think in that way, that it's all coming from outside, then we're actually narrowing things down for ourselves. We're confining ourselves. And then it'll be difficult for us to actually bring ourselves any well-being and happiness.
那我们处于现代的社会，现今的时代，但是往往呢，我们还会用传统的方式来思维。那特别是呢，我们说看到现在这个21的世界啊，世界当中呢有很多的冲突，有疫情、各种的病啊等等。那所以我们很容易的就像是跟随传统的说法，觉得说哦，现在这个时代呢就是很糟糕的，然后就都比不上过去了。而且呢，往往我们会想的就是好像一切都是从外在而来的。有时候呢，也会我们会想，觉得好像有一个造物主，他创造了一切，然后呢，他也给予了我们的苦，给予我们乐等等。那但是实际上，当我们这样的去看的时候呢，实际上我们是让自己更迷惑了，更远离实际的情况了，也是很难的真正这样的来让自己得到帮助。所以只有当我们真正的有深入的正确的理解的时候，那这样才能够让对我们的身心有帮助。当我们有这种深入的认知，我们的身心才能够放松啊，才能够心当中更有空间等等。那总之呢，并不是一切都是从外面而来的，而是呢，我们应该要了知啊，自身我们自己身心的安乐呢，是从从自心而来的啊，并不是外在的造物主给予我们的苦与乐。那甚至我们去思维我们的每一个呼吸通过观察呼吸，我们也可以了知到整个世界的运作的方式。那所以我们看现在的21世纪，我们说世界好像变小了。世界变小的原因是因为我们的教育还有知识，它不断的增加。那总之呢，如果我们觉得现在因为传统的说法说现在的时代我是一个很恶劣的时代，或者是总之呢就觉得不如过往等等觉得一切都是从外面而来，那这样的想法我们没有思维就去接受相信呢，就好像是自己 束缚自己了，自己让自己的观点见体呢变得更狭窄了。那所以那这样的我们很难得到让自己变束缚自己了，很难得到真正的利益的。
당가서도 공슈반노 예레네 자와시랍 용지도 몸보라사 랍지 니sab된 제요레 tadil zo za shira gu da tenza ro da ngo den do shik den ni na ja che tino da ngo den ge zo tenza ro da kar re shi ban da de ma so nam ju yong da je yo za wi ge jo za yong de ge mo ne tenza zo de kar re is da nga su de ha go gu yo zo jo za zo de kar re is da jo za zo da za wa shira gu da de da ronji ji ma ro pa se ya de ne yurdan ne ma ro pa se ya ne rongo ne ma ro pa se ya da de cha de zo den za yo na me na de ngo ji je za ro de cha de da de nga so de se longo le ra ban ro ko wa sha tu ya de ne a jo gar chim bu cha yo kan zen da de shen yo ge de sen to je jim se ge de sen ro ko ba na ta kayo la yu te se nenga che shu de nga so ra ba se de lo char ma ta ba na ten de sa bo dong cha wa cho la ne royal de ska le kha po cha de ro ta yi zan ro de rong yi ma zhop se ya de dong bu de cha yo ta rong yi ma zhop se ya de kan zhe ji ngon ji ge ri ta nga so de ha dong bo ne ka se sim jiu che lam na men do yong de ta kan zhe ji ngon ji ge ri shu ba na ta di ge do so de rong yi zhe ba se ya de 다때 딱반 타송 온데 제반 롱이 마저 다다 가서 롱이 마저 버땡도 저자 되게 되게 도서 롱이 저 봤다고 타송 간지 뭔지 그래 다때 가서 삼 동거 열어 롱이 저봐 열레베스나 여말 옛날 딱반 타송 온데 제만 딱 각자로 차로 간지 뭔지 그래 쉬반다 오늘 가서 드라이 얘기했나 가세타 뉴바 메바 네 로이게 약바 메바 다데로 드라이 뉴바 메바 로이 약바 메바 다 드라이 뉴바 메바스는 간르지 네 라브게 요레 시바나 다스든 가서다 조지게 다데 신고 민 다신도 민기 뉴바 메바지 추제 유송아이나 안데 롱이 좀 차요레스 다가노기 로이게 약과면 더 로이 약과면 간르이 뭔지 그러시나 다서 가서 로 대시어 저 근데 여지 남야 네 어떤 신케스나 면도 동케스나 다나가서 체마가 대세 희용으로 다 원선 재미게 차야는 저거 요리 예바 재미게 차는 야 저거 공지변나 로이게 네 다 약과면 봐도 되다 대시용다 원선 재미 동 예바 체마 공그 또마 터비 네 요르지 유송만 때 롱히 좀 차다 그때 요르선데 요마라 춘 요르지 인사위 유라 네 매게 고네 콘조그 요리 네 요르지다 무슨 세마라 쉬나면도 답변아 제바 세마 다가노지 시라고 변아 남주지 시라고 네 야르메 타바 또 마타바지 요마로 대인순도 요라 तावा थाजों दे रोंगी ड्रॉप्समा तंदे जेगोर ते मेरो ते मेसुंदु अने रोंगी चे माड्रो पास तते तिंगरो जो रोंगी चे माड्रो इंदे दे जेदों बेन रोंगी माड्रो परि जेबे को जिमजे दो अने खासे तेदा अने नामया खोयो मेबा चिने अने रोंगी माड्रो परि रोंगी माड्रो प चा छेंबोरी मसे नामजी सोरजी केसो जे यो दांगमी से चा छेंबोरी तोनी से चा छेंबोरी ते लाबा चांजे पिंतो छा थयो ब्रो 카유 라유 수수게 짐세도 르바 용다 고네 돈이 돈 하고 도바 돈 안에 다음이 돈 대다게 돈 하고 도바 또 도바 중반은 카유 라유 수수게 됐어 돈이 돈에 다음이 돼서 됐어 네在 침보리 수수게 라바에나 됐어 펜토 유다바 차대로 수수게 르바도 짐세 고네 돈이 돈에 다음이게 일로 야보제 하마오바이나 네 돈이시야 담이시야 효자 침보리 야보리 라바자는 수소나 데스 가져다 준비되는 면도 변도데 디스 하종의 영향지로
So as I said before, the root stanzas on the middle way is actually a fairly long text. There are 27 different chapters. So when you think about what is the topic of the text, well, there's what it teaches explicitly and what it teaches implicitly. And what it teaches explicitly, the main topic, if we can understand this, that's really important. So the main topic of it is that we can say that everything is not established or not proven, not established by nature. You could say that things do not depend upon objects. They do not depend upon something external. And if we can understand this, then this is actually really important for us. If we can understand the reasons, and if we can think about the reasons and use logic, then this is a really important point. If we aren't able to get an idea of this in our mind, then it'll be difficult for us to develop a real understanding. And so this is the main topic of the root stanzas of the middle way. So when we say that things are not established or do not exist by nature, then what do we mean by that? What does it mean to say that things do not exist by nature? Well, if we want to think about what that means, we have to understand actually what the opposite of that is. What would it mean to say that something exists by nature, that it naturally exists, that it really exists? So how do I identify what that means? If we can understand what that means, then we can understand what it means to say that things do not exist by nature. So to understand what it means to say that things do not exist by nature, in order to understand that, we have to understand what it means to say that things that do exist by nature. So when we say that things exist by nature, then what this means is that that thing is not just a phenomenon we refer to by language. Language cannot refer to that object. And it also means that it's not something that we make up with our minds. It's not imagined or made up in our minds. That's what we mean when we say that things exist by nature. So saying things that do not exist by nature means that language cannot refer to it and that it is not made up by our minds. And so in order to understand what that means, what we're saying is that if something can be referred to by a word, in other words, if you can give something a name, then we would say that that does not exist. So if there's something that cannot be referred to by a name, that you cannot give a name to, then that would naturally exist by its own nature. And that's also something that is not made up by the mind. And so this is thinking about looking in terms of the objects. Do the objects exist? Can we label them? Are they made up by our mind? Now, when we think about how do we know whether objects and things exist, then if we think about the Buddhist teachings on validity or epistemology, that we would say that things exist because they can be perceived by either perception or by inference. And so if something is made up by the mind, then that would be something that that cannot be known by either inference or by perception. And if it's not something that you can make up with the mind, then you can't know it. If it is not made up by the mind, then that would be not made up by the mind. It is something that would be naturally exist. But does such a thing exist? There isn't such a thing. And also, if there are things that cannot be referred to by words or by language, then there's no way we can know them, whether we try to know them by inference or try to know them by perception or by using our own intelligence. There's no way that we can know them. And because there is no such thing, therefore we say that things do not exist by nature. And so for that reason, there are many different ways to determine this and to present it. But this is not, if we just say to ourselves, well, understanding that things do not exist by nature, understanding that things are selfless, these are really important. These are great ideas, foundational ideas. If we just say that, it doesn't benefit us. Instead, we have to understand the reasons. We have to understand the logic. So we have to understand if we understand that, then we can know why things are empty. We can know why things are selfless, and we can realize that. And if we do that, then it'll be very beneficial for us. And in that way, that understanding or that knowledge of emptiness and selflessness will be really beneficial for ourselves. If we do not follow that path of logic, then we just say that we won't really be able to, get into understanding of egolessness or of emptiness. We won't be able to understand it. And if we just say it's important but do not understand it, then this will actually bring us very little benefit. It'll bring us few results.
那就如同之前提到的，在龙树菩萨的中观根本论当中呢，它是非常的长的，有27品。那当中它有讲到的是显的这样的意义，或者还有它的隐喻等等。那总之呢，如果我们可以了解它讲到的主要的义理呢，这就是对我们是很有利益的。所以它主要讲到的这个课题，或者是它的主要的义理呢，就是无自性，也就是一切的现象是无自性的，它不是依外而生的。那所以这一点了知呢，非常的对我们有利益。那特别是我们要了知的是它后面的原因哦，也就是这个义理后面的原因，它的推论如何推论，这才是它真正的重点。那如果不了解它的意义呢，就很难真正利益到我们了。那所以什么它的课题是无自性，那什么是无自性呢？我们怎么样能够去理解它呢？那所以我们要了解无自性，那首先我们要了知它的相反是什么，也就是如果我们说它的相反的话，无自性的相反代表的就是有自性的存在。那所以当我们说这样的一个对境，它是有自性的存在，我们所代表的是呢，它这样的一个对境它不是一个能够用语言能够指出的这样的一个对境，也就是或者是不是我们自心造作捏造出来的这样的一个对境哦。所以当我们这样去看的时候呢，我们是找不到，我们不是通过语言，或者是给它一个名字，让我们能够了解到的这样的一个对境，它是不存在的，也就是不是通过心去认知到的这样的一个对境，我们是找不到的，它是不存在的。而当我们去看佛教当中的关于正理论当中它有提到的，我们观察事物的方式可以通过限量跟比量两种的方式来了解。那我们可以发现如果不是通过限量或者是比量，就是逻辑的推理不是通过限量跟比量能够认知的对境，它是不存在的。那同样的来说，也就是不是通过语言、通过心去认知的这样的一种对境，也是不存在的。那也因此呢，也就是有自性的对境，它是不存在的。所以我们可以推论出这个无自性现象的无自性的这样的一种这样的一种特质哦。那所以总之呢，当我们平常讲到空性或者是无自性、无我等等，我们说这是很棒很好。 那但是如果只是这样说它是殊胜好的，并没有真的给我们利益哦。重点是我们要明白后面的它的理由、它的原因，我们真正了知呢，才能够真正的利益我们，否则呢，只是嘴巴说说呢，并没有太大利益的。
대체 당아서 대 유르땡네 마드라바 쉬로 다 유르땡네 마드라바 dombo 야보제 네 고아 차발라 되게 도초데 유르땡네 트바 차대로 다 딱반 타존 유르땡네 트바스야데 칸다제 모은지그레 쉬바이나 다 남정와서 때리다 근데 대용다다 공슈바 노이 네 가세 매고코네 네 jog me thopi yor chek tong ne kase ta yurji lo yu gon ne jog me thopi ne yor chek ta ti go yor ta man gon ne jog me thopi ne yor chek ta na khanda che ngon ji gre shuba na ta nga so tere deni shipi ne meng ze na me do deni shipi joji dra de ke ne jog me thopi ne 딱바 타종들다 요르게 유송하나 네 요르단 좀 받쳐도 다 너기 아니 덴바닌 저지 딱군 베나 따따테로 네 리히 제바 답베나 도담 저지 게네 리히 제바노 군접 덴반 저지 게 리히 제바 데니게 춘네 베나 아니 요르드 지메 타파도 또메 타파 네 요르게 유송하나 네 요르단 좀 받쳐 따테로 데 요르스는 춘네 요마로 근데 지금 말로 전으로 덴바니 베시피 맨케는 조금 토피 요르치 시그레스 테스그마 다 노게 데닌 저지케네 로예케네 완통바도 마토피네 요르치 시그레스 테스그마로 데 메시브 점세지네 요르단데 마드바스 따테히야고요 저 티시용데 카유라유코 줌세도 리파 사무고네코 네 카제티 람 우스 체네 네 주땡 마드바스야테 베나 저자톤 네 텐자 텐 파고 여르 마토피 타가서 네 리파도 줌세 코에 메비탄 오네 유땡네 마드바스 티히야고요 뭐 테 카유라유 수송가소테 롱어테 라바 샤르타바나 수수라 팽게요로 가르지 팽게요스네 당당 가서 때 정말 강ar 정말 몸박로 된 중국으로 가서 때 용라로 리때 동호때 또 차도요. 때 차운데 수수게 되게 남기야 야보마 현의 수수 몸박로 돼서만 됐어. 아니 가서 쇼충충 조토고요. 몸박로 돼서 쇼충충 조마 탑데 가디오네 되네. 대 강ar 틴도야 제마도 배 강ar 동네지야 차토고요. 봐.
Now, we also say that things are not established on the basis of an object, of being an object. And so to understand what it means to say that things are not established on the basis of an object, we have to understand what the opposite of that would mean. If we can understand what the opposite of that means, then we can understand better what it means to say that things are not established on the basis of an object. And so if there is a phenomena that is permanent and autonomous, and we say that, well, it's not established on the basis of an object, then it would have to be something that, as we said before, cannot be referred to by language and that is not made up by mind. It is also something that some sort of a conscious subject, a subjective mind would not be able to know. And so if it's like that, then if language cannot refer to it, then what would that mean? I mean, if there's no permanent and autonomous thing, that if something cannot be referred to by language, then it would be something that could be permanent and autonomous. But when you think about it, when you're talking about it in terms of language, we talk about it using the words of either talking about in terms of the relative truth or the ultimate truth. And there is no such object that we can use, that we can describe without, or that there is no object we cannot describe with those words. There's nothing else that would exist. Or if it's something where there is no a phenomena where there is no conscious subject that can prove it, then it would be a conscious subject that would be either viewing the relative truth or viewing the ultimate truth. And there is no object that could exist, no permanent and autonomous object that exists like that. Is there anything like that would be proven on its that would be proven on the basis of the object? There is no such thing. So when we think about it, whether we're talking about using language to talk about phenomena in terms of the two truths, or using knowing them through either of the no two truths, there is no object that cannot be, if there were an object that could not be known, there'd be no way it could exist. And so in this way, they are not proven in terms of the object. They're not established in terms of the object. And if we understand this, we need to understand the logics and the reasons for doing this, and for thinking in this way. If we understand it, then this will actually be really helpful for us for progressing down the path and understanding how things work. So when we say that things are not established on the basis of an object, then understanding this, if we're really understanding this, brings us benefit in our lives. And the reason why it brings us benefit in our lives is that most of the difficulties we face in our lives occur because of our own delusions. And if we do not understand how our delusions come about, then we will not be able to decrease our delusions, and then we'll have more difficulties. And so that's why it is important for us to understand how it works.
Khenpo, could you explain one more time the opposite of the topic that does not depend on the object?
Okay, so if there's a phenomena that does not depend upon an object, then that would have to be a permanent and autonomous phenomena that cannot be referred to by language, or that no conscious subject, no subjective consciousness would be able to know.
Okay, thank you.那除了无自性之外呢，那另外一点呢是提到的是不依对境，不是不依对境的基础而产生哦。那所以要理解到这一点呢，首先我们要知道它的相反是什么。当我们说它的相反就是不依对境而生，它是非依对境而生，所指的相反就是它是恒常的，是自主的。而所谓恒常跟自主呢，它所代表的就是它不能通过语言能够，或者是不能够通过主观的心去认知而存在的，这是自主跟恒常这样的一个意义。那所以当我们去观察我们说我们一般的语言，平常的语言，通过语言我们可以认知到世俗谛跟圣义谛。那我们发现不是通过语言跟语言能够认知到的这样的一个自主的常的对境呢，它是不存在的。那同样我们也是通过我们的心，通过我们的心的照见观察认知到的对境，我们也可以认知到世俗谛跟圣义谛。那我们不是通过这个心我们也不是通过心的对境去认知到的这样它不是恒常的，它也不是自主或者是恒常的，这样的它也是不存在的。 认识到的对境，它是常跟它是自主跟恒常的，这样是不存在的。那所以呢，通过这样的我们可以了解到它的相反，也就是不是依对境的基础而生呢，它是也就是事物是非依对境而生的。那所以我们要了解它当中的背后的逻辑跟原因，那这样呢才能够真正的帮助我们。能够帮助的原因呢是我们在这一生当中所遇到的这些种种的问题，都是从我们的各种的幻象迷惑的幻象当中所产生的。所以我们了知背后的原因，才能够真正的帮助我们去克服这些困难。
Tirda ngaso te hase rongo ne madro pasia ta de ngaso ne no tonda no karre ta shogo yoro ta jito rongo ne ta takba thazong de rongo drop songwa na khanda che go gres ta te ngaso te des longo sharo yoro ta rongo ne drop takba thazong de thoba ne de jiton de ngaso te chu ganda che ina ne khora pen non cha je tong ne tong cha jen men do yilo gi cha ni yoro ta non cha ji de ta pen ro ya wan de so re tong yi chu ji pen na pen chen yin ro ya wan zu da de ro za khoron chuma non cha cha de ro zu da de ro za khoro ge yilo de shu na men do ta tong cha se de ne lu cha de ro tong cha ge de ka se cha de ko 도난 데바 차도이리 에네 논샤가 차데 조 네 군접 데바 차도이로 다데 지운데 가서 때렸다 롱오네 딱바 타종데 롱오 줘바나 간다제 고고요리 예스니다 데레 군접 시주비 자 슈나 벤람나 men도 군접 시주비 에네 맹지요로 데게네 조 메토비게네 논차 오케이 에네 추제 요소아이나 에네 롱오 줘바다가 롱레스 다가 노기 페나 도담 시주비 람 도담 게 페나 맹지요로 대긴 조 메토비네 가서다 다다 동차제 동 크로 인록제 유소한 네 롱어 줘봤어요 다 대차요 대체 유페데 유르지 드라이게 고네 아니 페나 딱바 타종데 제반 아니 롱어 줘서 데레 다 유르지 로요 고네 아니 딱바 타종데 롱어 줘봐 유소만나 군접 여지 기본 리시 제바게 네 조 메토바도 또 메토비 농차제 유송아나 대용도 롱어 줘봐 차도 다가 너희 네 도남 저지 리시 제바게 네 요르드 치 메토바 자르드 메토바 네 또 메토비게 네 농치 벤 동차제 여바나 동차 람나 민도 다 코노게 일록지 유송반 롱어 줘봐 차도로 तति छन यामर वजन रिबा कासी पेना समनो तों कासी जेबा ना तंदस गमरवा ते मासी जमसे च ता रोंगो माटोब्स ता दे तितन जो रिबा जमसे ते गोन ता टगो यरो ति जिंग ता जावा शिराब के जोजा योना मना दे ता ते ता रोंजी जे माटोब यर्तन माटोब रोंगो माटोब्स ता ते ता ते जावी जोजा ते ची तिनेन पा यला गोन छोने ता रो नाम या मोबो संग यरो 마소 so the ragba so long 샤고야 고도 네 차고야 때 자와 시라고 저자 노데 가레데 시바나 롱이제 마라바 유르타는 마라바 롱어 마라바 다가 롱 차도 데 롱어 샤좀 되네 연락을 차는 수소파 네 수소가 공로 공장 때 삼노 동타바나 데세 람손 동 데세 란토야 리라우 차토그로 데 히지게 고로 저자 하 마오나 근데 연락은 지구 삼노 동다바네 근데 시라 카유라다 펜토 데스 뉴뇽로 차로와 데 정도 가서 조위게는 수수 삼노 동요 디단 동고요 레스
So now the third thing that we talked about is that things must not be established by their own nature or on their own terms, or established in and of themselves. And what this means is that if there is a phenomena, a permanent and autonomous phenomena that is established in and of itself, then that, if we think about it, saying that things are not established in and of themselves, then what that means is that there would have to be some phenomena that is established in and of itself. And so that would, so when we think about any phenomena, there is the way it appears and the way it actually is. So there is the way it appears and the way it actually is, or the empty aspect of it. And so when we think about it in that way, when we've got the appearing aspect, and so the appearing aspect is the way that like forms and sounds and scents and touches and so forth appear to us. And then there is the way things are, and that is the empty aspect, the nature of how they are. So the way things appear to us, that's the relative truth, and the way things actually are, that is the ultimate truth. So now, if there were something, a phenomena, a permanent and an autonomous phenomena that were established in and of itself, then that would have to be something that could not be referred to by it could not be referred to by words, or could not be known by some. It'd have to be something that would be established, where the appearance would be established in and of itself without being referred to by a name. So on a relative level, it would have to be something that you could not refer to with a relative name. On an ultimate level, that phenomena that would be permanent, or that permanent autonomous phenomena that is established in and of itself, you would have to you would not be able to refer to its nature with a name, whether we talk about that as its nature or the empty aspect. So if it is something that cannot be referred to by a name that describes emptiness, then it would be existent in and of ourselves. Now also, and so that's thinking about it in terms of the words or language that refer to the objects. Now, likewise, if you think about it in terms of the conscious subject, or the consciousness that knows it, then in terms of the relative truth, it would have, in terms of the appearance, it would have to be something that could not be known by inference or logic, or perceived or known by that. If it is something that cannot be, if it is a phenomena that cannot be known in that way, then relatively, it does not exist by its own nature. In terms of the ultimate, when we use the ultimate and the logic that analyzes the ultimate and so forth, then it would have to be something that could not be known or could not be realized by that sort of logic either. And in that way, the empty aspect of it would be established in and of its own essence. The empty aspect of the nature would be established in its own essence. But there's no such phenomena at all. There's no way that there could be such a possible phenomena. And so understanding this is what it means when we say that things do not exist by nature, that they do not exist in and of themselves. And if we understand that and understand the logics, then it is very beneficial for us. So this is the main topic of the root stanzas of the middle way. It is saying that things are not established by nature. It is saying that things are not established on the basis of an object, and things do not exist in and of themselves. So if we understand this is the main topic we need to understand. Now, there are many secondary topics that are also discussed in the root stanzas of the middle way, but if we understand the main topic, that things do not exist by nature, that they do not exist based on an object, or that they do not exist in and of themselves, and we understand that main point, then all of the different secondary points will be much easier to understand. If you understand the main point, then we think about the second one. It's like, oh, okay, that's easy. I understand that. It'll be easier to understand. But if we do not understand the main topic, and instead if we do not understand this main topic, then no matter how much we think about the secondary aspects, then it will not be of much benefit for us, and we will not be able to make much progress on the path of understanding.
那首先呢，关于刚才第二点的主要的义理，也就是非一对境而生的部分呢，可能我重新组织一下那个语言，可能会比较更清楚一点。那所以非一对境而生，也就是代表它是恒常的、独立自主的。那所以如果我们去观察，如果是能够通过我们的心或者是语言能够所了知到的，它都不是独立，都不是独立的，不是独立自主的，不是恒常的。那也因此呢，也就是非一对境而生，它的相反，它是不存在的，不成立的。那所以刚才的是关于第二点的部分。所以第三个要点呢，也就是是非依自生的，它不是依赖自己而生的。那这样的一个代表的，也就是它自己本身是恒常的是独立的。那如果是这样的，当我们这样说它是成立的话，也就是说它是依赖自己而生的，也就是代表它在显现的层面它在显现的层面显现就是实相，也就是我们一般说的显现跟实相。实现代表的是空性的分就是空性，就是显相跟实相它是一般的。是一样的所以通常当我们说显现的层面，它所代表的是如色、声、香、味、触等等。而当我们讲到实相的时候，它所代表的就是空性空性的层面，空性分。那所以当在我们说它是恒常的自主的时候，代表的是它是依自生的。那如果是这样的话呢，我们同样可以去观察，通过语言跟心识的层面，也就是同样的，如果我们是通过语言能够对不起，我看一看，我要看一下这个自己写的笔记啊。那这里呢，跟刚才第二点的也是类似的，也就是不管是在语言的层面，我们不通过语言能够认知到的这样的一个对境呢，它是不存在的。那同样的，在我们能观的心识当中我们也可以了知到的这个世俗谛跟圣义谛，我们不依逻辑推理不依明智能够了解到的这样的一个对境呢，它也是不存在的。那在圣义谛的层面，也是我们了解到的空性的层面，如果是不依我们的心去观察了解，不通过语言等等能够认知到的，它也是不存在的。那所以呢，我们说它是并不是依自而生的。那总之呢，在这个课题当中呢，就是讲到三个主要的重点了，三个重点，也就是无自性、 非依他而生非自生，这3点呢是主要的。那还有其他次要的论点，但是如果我们了知主要的论点的主要的这些观点的话，那么要了解次要的观点就很容易了。那相反，如果我们没有真正的了知主要的要点，但是去思维次要的这些次要的部分呢，那这样我们很难真正的在了知的这个道上面呢得到进步。
是，我说我都经常在哈参加个去number 开始的，之外有没有弄这学
So this is enough for our class this morning. And if there is anyone who has any questions, please ask.
那我们今天早上的讲的部分呢到这里。那如果各位有问题的话呢，可以请大家提问。
Please go ahead.
Can Khenpo give us an example regarding that you just taught us? It's very difficult to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So di Khenpo ge kaso di la pegi tenne te kaso ranjing madrupa ane yu tende madrupa ane rangone madrupa de pegi gone chi tentupna de gi peda chi shatupna.
了是谁的达不了的，但我说的变着的，的亚洲的就见着可以呢，就这个是容易找上班呢，就蛮久的，就这些就比这些，就这那就个么呢，那就这的容易找不强了。大家弄些那就这好别个好公开个本来就这东开个，但没些什么人呢，这里用大家弄些。我上的结巴可能有了哇，这个本来就这那好可这个好过没，他不就这就有什么呢？就这容易吃吧，这差头了啊。大把他用的，这要么了，这没对准这些就这可能那容易去嘛，这把是他的行为。但多的呢，就对了，就这个没比就这就有什么东那。就个是没比就这东那录音就没特别就这有什么呢？就这容易做吧，是的的。
So the example is like a table. If you say that there's a table that exists by its nature, then that would mean that there would have to be some table that the word table didn't refer to. The word so if there's like some real table that the word table doesn't refer to, then that real table would exist by nature. Or if you could think about it in terms of like a conscious subject that would know about it, like an eye consciousness that sees the table, a perception of the table, inference of the table. If you aren't able to know the table by either seeing it or inferring it, then it would exist by nature. This is talking about as being something that is autonomous and permanent and isn't made up by mind. And so another way of putting it about is saying, if there is a table that you can, if there were a table that truly existed, you wouldn't be able to name it, and you wouldn't be able to engage it with your mind. Then we would say that exists by its nature.
那刚才的问题呢是让堪布举一个例子，因为刚才讲到的很难懂，那所以堪布呢 给的一个例子呢，就是桌子。那假如说我们说这个桌子是真正存在的话呢，也就是可以说它桌子这个名字它所指的这个对境呢，它是真实的，或者是它的我们说这个桌子呢，它并没有这个名字所指到的这样的一个对境，它是存在的。那同样的，我们用我的眼识，或者是我们眼睛看到的摄像来说，如果我们眼睛所看到的这个对境，我们不是通过眼识来观察到的话，它才是真正的存在的，或者是说我们观察到的这个对境，它不是真实的存在的。也就是说，如果我们能够用语言明智去指出它的，或者是通过我们的心能够去认知到它的这样的一个对境呢，它都不是真实的存在，或者是说它呃呃，也就是说不是通过语言跟心能够认知到的，这样的才是常或者是自主的、独立的。
तब दो शुनते डर तक को पेना जुड़ा टेरो रिजा योरे जुड़ा टेरो रिजा माई बेचो योरा कोंजी जुड़ा टेरो रिजा कोरों गे ने महंगे मैं योरा कोरो जुड़ा टेरो रिजा कोरों महंगे ने जुड़ा टेरो रिजा लंजो थब गे मिना लंजो में थब भी कासी जुड़ा टेरो रिजा जे यो सोआना इन ती जुड़ा टेरो रिजा ते रोंगी ट्रपा ते चारो ता नो जुड़ा टेरो रिजा कोरों गे ने हा गोंगे तो तोंखे के युर्जी लो जे योरो ane tindi lo teke to me topi yor zuda terroriza che yuswan ane ti zuda terroriza te ne rongyi chba ta chan ta yenda choma ringde chi choro na kha je te ne pen rongyi chso che ta ba ta song de rongyi chba che des su long ra ba char to ba na te yenda choma de ka sen de ringde chi choro.
So to kind of make it simple or easier, if you think about it, there are all sorts of phenomena. There are forms and sounds, scents, tastes, and touches. There are phenomena that are none of these. But if we think about it, if we like have a form or a sound or a scent or a taste that you couldn't give a name to, that a name couldn't refer to, that you couldn't give a name to it, then we would say that that form or sound or scent or taste or whatever it is truly exists. Likewise, if we have that form or sound and scent or taste, and there was no mind that could know it, if there was no mind that could realize it or perceive it, then we would say that it exists by its own nature. So it's like this. And so if you understand that there's no such form or sound or scent or taste, and you understand that with one phenomena, then you understand that all other phenomena are analogous to that and the same. So the same logic also applies to them.
那如果我们简单一点的来说呢，比如是说我们平常的这个提到的色声香味触等等的诸法，如果比如是色相，如果它是不依名利的，我们说它是真的，也就是不是通过名字、语言等等而成立的，不依名利的，我们说它是真的。那同样的来说，这样的色声香味触等等，这些对境，如果它不是依心立的，不是通过心识的认知而成立的，那我们说它是真实的，也就是说说它是有质性的。所以同样的逻辑，如果你知道一种现象，你就知道一切的现象，也就是知一法，也就知道一切的法。
I think that Mary Jane Naring also has a question. So if you can unmute yourself, I think you're working on that. Oh, there you are.
There we go. I have a question, and maybe I heard wrong or took notes wrong. Right at the beginning, when you were talking, Khenpo was saying we must understand the opposite, which would be things are established by nature. And you mentioned the point about language or a name not referring to anything. My question is about the second point. Things cannot be made up by our minds.
Mhm.
And that would include can't be known by inference, can't be known by perception. And I thought I heard a third one, can't be known by our intelligence. And it's the third point I wanted to ask about. Did Khenpo
Is it?
say that in fact?
Yeah.
Or, okay. And
Okay.
if that was the third point, then what is the place of logic and reason?
Oh.
Because logic and reason obviously
Right.
Entails our intelligence.
맞아. Thank you. 다 가서 캠보기 숨바나 신데 지탄기 온도 치는 라신기 드로바치 고고베나 되게 도초 라신기 마드로바치 고고베나 되게 도초 라신 드로바다치 고고도스 대한 가서네 민기고니 마주바체 되네 로이 샤지 메바당 안디 숨바데라니 되네 제바 당 무숨당 네 가서 리베고네 셰미토바다지 송도 대라바치다 타타카리 송도 단단히 통문도 이난 간타르데 아니 숨바데라 리피 제바기 거네 가서 리피타지 제베 거네 가서 셰미토바다지 고고도 스타지 송도 이 데라지기 드로파연 메나데 가서 리피 거네 마셰바다지 고고도 다 디기 된다 카리나스 데 카링 무슨 체고레스 and 데이터와치 이나 가서네 제바 다 리피 람데 게점 마르베 스타지 캐치레
tirda tata ngaso te jepa ke lamne pena ngosam do jepa ke lamne pena ha ko metha pe yor che to ne so man ke menjo pe yor che kasi sepa yin so na ta ngaso rong yi tropa labro te ching de te sin do su men do che ripi ke pe lamne tak chi che ko ta ripi lam tak chi che to yon na pe na ngosam ke lam tak chi che ko yon na jepa ke lam tak chi che ko te mata pe yon de da rong yi tropa zo yon ko te rikwa de da ngosam de jepa ni yon yenda che la yon ripi ke jim se che yo ba te he yo mar ko de da ti ripi lam je de zo ngosam de jepa ke lam ne tab lam tel ten de ta ga tak chi che ko zo ti tan da ro
So here, Khenpo did say this, and so what Khenpo said is that if there was something that we can know with perception, or that we can know through the path of inference, then we couldn't say that it exists by nature. For example, if we can refer to it by name, if it's impossible for us to refer to it by name or to know it by perception or inference, then that would be something that exists by its own nature. And when we talk about it being known by the path of logic and so forth, then actually that just means examining it. Now, generally, we would think of this as generally going through either perception or through inference. But if there is some sort of a third way of using logic and reasoning to understand things, then if we could be that it could be understood, then that would be also possible. But of course, there is no other way. So in general, the path that we need to follow is to use our perception and inference to see if we can establish things. That's the path we need to follow.
那刚才的问题是问到关于非一自性生的时候呢，有提到的是不依心力的时候，也是有提到不依心的自伤，或者是我们的心的认知智商而立的。那所以问题是逻辑推理跟 这个我们说智商的关系是怎么样的。所以堪布说，当我们提到它不是依自非自生这里的所举的这个推论呢，也就是通常我们的认知是通过限量或者比量，也或者是说我们通过我们的逻辑推理或者是我们的感知来认知的。那如果我们能够通过这两种来认知的，那我们就说，这样的一个对境呢，它不是自生的，不是依自性而成立的。那但是，其实我们在这里要说的一点，也就是我们应该追随的这个方法道呢，是我们需要通过用限量跟比量这样的一种方式呢，来认知事物。
Khenpo de microphone ka chero de.
我说现在这没得，我说我话得等吧，那现在这是吧？
If there are no other questions, then we will recite the dedication prayers.
如果没有问题呢，我们就念回向文。
Sonam de Tamji Zigba Ni Tomne Nibe Jana Panze Ne Jega Nanje Bala Druva Ye Sipi Sula Druva Shu. Thank you, Shishi.